There we go. Hey everyone. Well, I just realized I was about 30 minutes into this recording and it wasn't properly recording. So let's try it again. What do you say? That's about all we can do. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back to figure 313 and look at Menkori and Kamera Nabati and start to look at that in regards to these Egyptian canons. So with all the sculptures and everything that we're going to look at, it's going to be a heavy focus on the Egyptian canons. And the main Egyptian canons that I really want you to focus on again are the hieroglyphics. Are they present? It's that leg shifted forward. Is it present? It's the simplistic, blocky, kind of geometric shaping of the bodies, the overall contour, and seeing if that is present. Also, the use of the archaic smile and the hierarchical scale. All right. So, whenever you look at figure 313, you can see that all of these elements are present except for the hieroglyphs. We don't see the hieroglyphics present on this sculpture. You can see that his leg and her leg are both shifting forward. You can see that there's a very geometric and simple blockiness to the body. There's also that symmetry that's present, giving him more of that rigid body and her more of that rounded cylinder-like body. You can see the archaic smile that is present in both of their faces. He is just a little bit taller than she, so that is an emphasis on that hierarchical scale. But she's very close to the same size as him. So again, that starts to show a little bit of status in relation to the pharaoh. We don't see the use of hieroglyphics like I just mentioned, so that is the main canon and standard that is not present here in figure 313. But in contrast to that, in figure 314, you see the seated scribe, and there's more organic or natural features involved in the scribe, because even though he has an elevated position or a higher epsilon of placement within the class and the caste of the Egyptian pharaoh's orders, he is not holding those Egyptian canons. He's not reflecting or representing them. He has more of rounded features. He has more organic features where you can see there's a little bit more of a focus on skin and muscle, and even little bit of fattiness involved to his flesh. So those are indicators of someone who is not preparing for the afterworld in an ideal body. It's someone that is present there to assist and to help the pharaoh, but isn't going to be taking on the same mission as the pharaoh. So his disposition and his look and design is going to look a little different than the pharaoh. He's going to be able to have more of a organic, natural look to him. Now there's still order involved, there's still symmetry involved, but there's more of a focus on shifting muscularity. There's also an emphasis on more detail with his fingers and his toes, and it's more about the idea of what someone looked like at that time versus the ideal of what the pharaohs are supposed to look like before they go on into the afterworld. And the great thing about the seated scribe in figure 314 is we can see how these sculptures were painted. And I want you to recognize and to remember that these sculptures, most of them were painted. And because they used a quote unquote cheaper stone, the limestone, is we're seeing the paint actually reflected on the surface, because the limestone has more of a porosity to it and allows for that Egyptian paste, which is considered the paint at that time, to remain on the surface, so we can see what they actually look like and how they were supposed to be painted. There's more emphasis on his facial features and the definition of his dimples and the different curves and lines that are around his cheekbone and his mouth. So again, not focusing on the ideal, but more focusing on the idea of what the everyday person looked like during this Old Kingdom period in Egypt. So again, less of an interest on the Egyptian canons versus the sculptures that we see of the pharaohs and the family members of the pharaohs, representing more of these Egyptian canons. For example, going back and looking at figure 315, Ty watching the hippopotamus hunt, this is really the first example that we have besides the palette of King Narmer all the way back in the pre-dynastic period, where we're seeing all of these Egyptian cannons starting to surface. He's much bigger than everybody else around him, so that's the hierarchical scale. B, you have that simplicity of form. All right, there's a lot of blockiness and simple geometry involved with his body, as well as the attire and the hair in which he has upon his body. There's also an emphasis on the profile and the frontal. You can see most of his body is in profile, but certain features like his upper torso is frontal. All right, so that emphasis on the frontal and the profile, not frontal but the profile, but it's both of them combined. All right, there's also the archaic smile that's present upon his face, and he also has the leg that is jettisoning forward, his left leg, indicating that he's prepared to be going into the afterlife, all right, preparing for that other world. And the sixth, of course, is the writing itself, so the configuration of the hieroglyphics upon the relief. So those are the six main things, and Ty watching the hippopotamus hunt should be your indicator on where you start to see those six main Egyptian canons becoming present again. All right. Now, a couple more things I want you to recognize with figure 315, Ty watching the hippopotamus hunt, is one, is this is called relief, and it's specifically called sunken relief, where they're carving into the limestone to reveal the figures. So how they're doing this, if you zoom in on the image, you'll see that it looks like there's a hard black line around the contour of Ty, but almost like it's a comic book or a graphic novel, hard black contour line. But it's not a drawn line, it's a carved, half-inch deep carving that gives this heavy shadow that goes all the way around the contour of Ty. All right, so know specifically that this is called sunken relief. So the Egyptians are going to be the ones that invent this concept of using sunken relief. The second is a good question came up in regards to the use of limestone, and I had mentioned that the more precious stones are going to be set aside for sculptures and imagery of the pharaoh as well as his family. And so the question is, why are they using limestone in regards to Ty, who is a very important family member of the pharaoh? And the reason they're doing that is because these palace structures, as well as many of the buildings and the temples and the pyramids in which all of these pharaohs and these family members of pharaohs lived and walked through and were part of, were made of this limestone and sandstone because it was much easier to construct these buildings using this stone. And everywhere throughout these palaces and these temples, there are hieroglyphic carvings and narrative images, such as figure 315. And whenever it comes to carving in and just the architecture and engineering using heavy precious stones, is going to be more difficult than it is using the limestone, which is going to be easier to carve into. You can get more narration done very quickly, and it's preserved, and it preserves the paint in which they paint upon as well. So it's not, the use of the limestone in this case is not to degrade Ty's position or to demote him based off of that kind of hierarchical acceptance, but it's more of a practical use of material to be able to get the narration across and to make it look clear. So that's why they use the limestone in this case. All right. Now, the next thing I want you to do is we're going to start shifting into Middle Kingdom. And figure 317 is going to be that time period where we move into Middle Kingdom. Now, the important thing to know and to recognize with the Middle Kingdom Egypt is we're going to start to see more emotions. We're going to start to see more of a focus on emotions at the beginning of the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom will last for about 400 years. Around 1860 BCE is when the Middle Kingdom is really going to start. And figure 317 head of Senusrit the third is going to indicate to us a little bit more of an emotional time and a kind of a lack and less interest in using the Egyptian cannons. They'll still be there, and they'll definitely come back at the end of the Middle Kingdom, but not as much. And the reason that these are not as prevalent during the Middle Kingdom is because there's more of a focus on or what's happening at that time contextually and socially is that the main kingdom of the old kingdom is being broken down into smaller kingdoms. So there's a lot of strife, there's a lot of division, and whenever there's strife and division, there's often an indicator of some kind of emotion that is rising up in society at that time. So the artwork will start to reflect that. And a good, more contemporary example or a more modern example of that is where the fine arts were in the 50s or the 40s and the 40s and the 50s. The 40s and the 50s of America. And during the 40s, you had the World War II, and hold on. During the 40s, there was World War II, and of course, that is one of the great wars. And a lot of the artists that came out of World War II were part of. A lot of the artists during the 50s were part of World War II. And there's obviously a lot of emotion and a lot of those things involved. So, hold on.